This is the word of the Lord.
Isn't that a jolly Bible reading? As I looked at this text, part of me thought, maybe we won't do that one. But I think it's actually very important. And I'm going to take you on a bit of a philosophical, theological, anthropological journey this morning. Try and come with me. If not, it's going to be short. You're going to have a cup of tea afterwards and it'll be okay. Unity and peace are two essentials for ongoing, viable human life and community. Now, the thing is, we actually need community. It's not an optional extra. Human beings need each other in order to survive. And anything that threatens community puts at risk the very viability of humanity itself. Strife and dissensions spell threat. As Jesus himself once repeated a saying that I'm sure was known, if a kingdom is divided against itself, that kingdom cannot stand. If a house is divided against itself, that house will not be able to stand. That's in Mark chapter 3, verse 24 and 25. The priority of maintaining peace and holding the community together in unity has long been understood by the politically savvy people. Various techniques and mechanisms have been discovered and developed to secure this peace and unity. And for much of human history, we haven't really been conscious of what they were. They just worked and we did them and they held the community together and kept peace. And it's not easy to analyse a process you are fully caught up in experiencing, especially when it's touching on matters of survival, of life and death for the community. But for most of human history, most often, peace and unity have been achieved in approximately the same manner. Unity is galvanised by rallying the community together in defence against a common threat or foe. And peace is maintained by the fear of the perpetual threat that lurks for those who step outside the boundaries of the established unity. So when a crisis arises in the community, as they always do from time to time, it's important that the culprit be identified. Responsibility and blame are understood to rest on this alleged culprit, and the alleged culprit is dealt with, usually expunged, cast out, or executed in some way. It's a tried and true process, and there's something deeply comforting for us in it. It triggers our limbic system, that paleo-mammalian part of our brain from whence arise the most fundamental of our survival drives. It fits neatly into our threat, fear, react, survive set of evolved instincts. Now, a crucial part of this process is, for it to be effective, we have to misrecognise something in that process. There's a lovely French word. You might know this one, Jeffrey. Méconnaissance. Yes? Okay, so you misrecognise a key part of what happens. In reality, the alleged culprit is not actually responsible for the crisis. Most often the accused is someone who is already on the fringes of the community, someone who is relatively easy for the group to reject. It's a very common dynamic. And it's worth noticing that the story of the formation of Israel involves this very dynamic. Several generations after Joseph had died, a new pharaoh in Egypt arose who saw the foreign Hebrews in their land as a threat. So the Hebrews had come into Egypt, and this pharaoh had come a generation or so after Joseph, and he saw these Hebrew people in the land, and he saw them as a threat. Does that sound familiar to anybody these days? The Hebrews being cast out of Egypt was instrumental in the formation story of the nation of Israel. We retell that story each year at the Passover. But notice also that Pharaoh had to create a justification for his rejection of the people. Joseph's people were no threat at all, in fact. They'd been welcomed into Egypt at a time when Joseph had managed the Egyptian economy and saved the Egyptian nation from famine. The Hebrews were smart, strong, hard-working people, but they were not native Egyptians. Pharaoh imagined a worst-case scenario. What if Egypt were to be invaded by another nation and the Hebrews were to side with Egypt's enemies? Now, there was no indication that this was likely. It was just a fear. The Hebrews were good citizens. But Pharaoh conjured the fear of a non-existent threat and then acted on his misrecognition of the situation. The deception that fear creates is the imagining of a threat where no threat actually exists. As soon as there is a real person or group upon which that fear can be focused, you only need the perceived threat level to rise and frightened people will begin to act. Now, the thing about creating unity and maintaining peace at the expense of part of the community is that it's fundamentally oppressive. A person or a subgroup is victimised and oppression or suppression ensue, all in the interest of stabilising the situation for the well-being of everybody else. And we hear this idea very clearly articulated in the Gospels from the mouth of Caiaphas, the high priest, when he counsels, "It is expedient for you that one man die for the people and that the whole nation not perish." You can look that up in John 11, verse 50. So Caiaphas can see it's a good thing to just let someone take the blame, better than the whole nation being destroyed, right? Expedient it may be. Healthy and life-giving, it most certainly is not. Because when the stability of a society is built upon a deception that extracts benefits for some at the expense of others, you have oppression. And even when all those who were initially involved are long gone in history, the issues are not thereby resolved. The culture and society that grow from that seed have oppression in the social DNA. All the institutions of the society quietly whisper, "We are sustained by taking someone else's blood." So not only the victims are oppressed, but those who benefit have to repress their awareness of the unpalatable roots of the culture that forms and sustains them. And I cannot help but wonder if this is not the fuel that fires so much of our conversation about First Nations issues. Those of us who are descendants of settler arrivals of the most recent 200 years or so, we sense there is an injustice upon which our present-day culture is built, and we simply don't know what to do with that. And many of us choose to push down that awareness altogether. Repressing awareness takes effort, even if it's unconscious effort, and it's neither easy nor comfortable. And anything that makes it harder and less comfortable to push that awareness down, we will tend to want to shut down. Now, Jesus stands in contrast to this. He was never intimidated by the threat of being shut down. Rather, again and again we see in the Gospels, Jesus is moved by compassion for those who are suffering either under oppression, being excluded, like the prostitutes and the beggars and the people that had leprosy and so forth, or suffering under the weight of suppressing their awareness of the oppressive nature of the culture, like the tax collector Zacchaeus, that kind of thing. Jesus was not restrained by concern for his own safety or his position in the community. His response to a person or situation was never about himself at all. It was always about opposing the forces that held people down from living the fullness of their dignity. Jesus was all about setting people free from the fear of judgment and exclusion, and free to live in unfettered response to God's grace. Jesus did this by his acceptance and welcome of those who had been cast out to the fringes, and by his very direct confrontation of those who sought to hold power over others. In short, Jesus was fully and deeply engaged with all comers, and he had a knack of knowing just what was needed to call those he was relating to more fully into the life that God had created for them. Jesus was particularly proficient at exposing hypocrisy embedded in the culture. And it's an irony that a common accusation of the church is that the church is full of hypocrites. Because of course it is. Because the society is full of hypocrites. In fact, the whole culture creates hypocrites. Because if you understand what a hypocrite is an actor, a person who pretends to be a different person. That's what a hypocrite is. And we're all hypocrites a good deal of the time. We feel the societal pressure to fit in with our culture. In short, we play a role, not doing whatever we please. We do not just do what we feel like at every moment. We do what's required for us to fit in and to get ahead, don't we? Much of our life ends up being much less to do with what we feel we are in essence, and much more to do with how we have become by practice, doing what we need to do. We're all hypocrites, right? I know I am. By contrast, Jesus did not become what those around him wanted him to be. He continued to respond instead to his Father's call and what he saw his Father doing. Jesus didn't get sidetracked by political games or petty rivalries. He was extraordinarily focused, and not focused on a narrow vision of his own advancement, as the world so often schools us to be, but focused on an extraordinarily broad and encompassing vision of shalom, of peace, of well-being, thoroughgoing peace and well-being for everybody, and even for the environment itself. A vision of sustainable social interaction not built on constantly transferring blame to people who have the least capacity to carry it, rather calling each of us to walk responsibly before our God and in love toward our neighbour. Now, Jesus was no reactionary protester. His main contribution was not merely to resist the currents of the dominant culture. Jesus introduced whole new currents to the mix, genuine alternatives to the ways that were assumed to be absolute. Jesus freely interacted with people long identified as unholy and unclean. He performed healings as opportunities arose, unrestrained by the interpretations of laws about the Sabbath. And he deliberately went to the heart of Israel's worship culture and disrupted the system of getting authorized sacrifices at the temple, disturbing the financial system, overturning tables of coins and dispersing the stock. And Jesus' way was not even that new in a way. Samuel, way back when Israel was just becoming a kingdom under King Saul, said these words, "Has the Lord as much delight in burnt offerings and sacrifices as in obeying the voice of the Lord? Behold, to obey is better than sacrifice, and to heed than the fat of rams." So to do what God's calling you to do is more important than going through the religious processes, as it were. And it's easy to imagine how the keepers of the established tradition must have responded to Jesus. How dare you? By whose authority do you do these things? How disrespectful of our most cherished ways. He must be stopped permanently. Now, none of this conflict caught Jesus by surprise. He saw it coming from a long way off, and he encouraged other people to see it coming as well. Jesus knew that the culture of the world would react the way the culture of the world always reacts. Threat, fear, rally around, and then expel. When Jesus spoke of casting fire on the earth in this passage, he was referring to his life resulting in the breakdown of the tried and true mechanisms for holding people together. In a sense, Jesus' declaration of God's gracious acceptance of all who desired that acceptance subverts the fear that fueled the old ways of unity and peace. Without the ever-present shared fear of rejection, the former ways lose their traction to hold a group together. If a new way of living and working together is not adopted, chaos becomes increasingly likely. And in the face of chaos, and with no universal narrative to help us discern a shared sense of what is going on, such as there seems to be today, we humans will naturally revert to the relative protection of our tribe, our smaller group. And we see this in every part of every culture today, I think. The fires of undifferentiated fear and chaos. Of course, it was never Jesus' purpose merely to cast fire on the earth. He really is the Prince of Peace. So he's not the Prince of Chaos or fire or anything else. Yet his peace is so profound that it disrupts all fear-based, oppressive, coercive mechanisms that would seek to hold people together. The champions of the old ways will not tolerate the subversion of their power. The unwillingness of the princes of deception to bow before the Prince of Peace is a limited time hiatus, because truth is corrosive to deception, and the passing of time reveals what is true. No matter how unwilling we might be to accept the fact, lasting peace can only be built on the foundation of thoroughgoing truth. And the most fierce fights are nearly always over the question of what is true. Jesus warns us this fierce storm is upon us. And if your eyes are open, you know we are in the midst of that firestorm now. You see, the world sustains unity and peace by taking the life of another. Jesus offers an entirely different way by offering his own life. Any culture built on the taking of life is fundamentally fear-based and has innate elements of oppression. The culture built upon Christ's freely given life is built on love and is innately liberating towards the fullness of life. The old ways of the world are exposed and disabled by Christ's willingness to allow them to work on him in the way that they did on the cross. And Christ rises again, the Son of God. He is by definition not guilty and yet somehow victimized. And we can now see the inadequacy of the mechanism that society once made use of without even realizing we did. Christ has shown us a far superior way to foster the richest possible life together, but we should not be naive. Those who enjoy their oppressive power do not give it up so willingly. And the gospel offers us no script for taking power by force, only for living into an entirely different way. And when we live into this other way, the way of God's kingdom, there is no power in the world that can rob us of our reward. So yes, there is fire because there's conflict of two different ways of doing things. And we should see that coming as Jesus commanded us. But let us remain true to that which is true, to the glory of the one true God. Let us pray. Lord, we thank you that you didn't pull your punches, that you spoke very eloquently of the clash of ways, and yet you call us into the way of peace in the midst of violence. And we seek to be faithful to the glory of your name. Amen.